Hi Archers! Today I'll be guiding you through my updated spirit/pet tier list for patch 2.2.3. In this video, I'll be ranking all the spirits and we'll be going through tier lists for different categories and their pros and cons with an overall tier list at the end. My goal here is to help you decide which pet you would like to use. My name is Teeds. If you're new here, feel free to subscribe and click the bell for more ARCHERO videos. A disclaimer, as always, this is based on my research, experience, and opinion. You may not agree with me, and that's perfectly okay. Always adjust your own playstyle and preference. Someone mentioned to me in my comments that there are other tier lists and they were wondering which tier list they should follow. That is completely up to you on which tier list you want to follow. There are multiple resources for ARCHERO other than YouTube, and each tier list you find will have their own reasons for their rankings. For my tier list, I did some testing for the pets to figure out their attack speed and calculate their overall DPS. DPS stands for damage per second. I also looked into how each pet plays and how strong their knockbacks were. The last tier list I did for pets was over a year ago. A lot has changed then and since, my opinion of pets have also changed. In my old ranking, when there were only 4 pets, I ranked Living Bomb as the worst, Scythe Mage in 3rd place, Elf in 2nd place, and crowned the Laserbat as the best pet. But back then, I was also pretty new to ARCHERO, and while the ranking back there, in my opinion, was fitting for the times, I have now figured out a lot more about the pets than I did then. So not too long ago, ARCHERO has added 2 new pets into the mix. I'm a little bit overdue for this tier list. We are welcoming the Flaming Ghost and the Noisy Owl. Where do these two fit into the ranking? Since some of you may not be familiar with these 2 new pets, the Flaming Ghost fires 1 projectile ball that splits into 2 balls with a line in the middle. This projectile goes through walls and can pierce through multiple enemies. The Noisy Owl, which is my favorite in regards to design, it looks really pretty. This owl fires 2 large wind projectiles like its own built-in front arrow. Each of these projectiles do the same damage, so you can basically do double damage if both projectiles hit the enemy. In my research, I considered each pet's attack speed, damage, projectile speed, utility, knockback, and then my experience of each pet on a few runs. I found out that all pets will move after firing 3 shots. So after every 3rd shot, the pet will reposition itself. There was no pattern to this from what I found. Sometimes it moved far away and sometimes it barely moved, but in my experience, they overall stayed in a radius around the player. First, let's talk DPS. So in my opinion, damage is not everything. Some pets do more damage than others, but they could also miss more or have weaker knockbacks, etc. However, you can't really calculate that in math. This is why I'll be ranking each pet in different categories to get a clear overall picture. All of these stats are based on level 40 epic pets. I manually calculate their attack speed, and because it's based on my calculations, these attack speeds may not be 100% accurate. We'll be going from weakest to strongest. In last place is the Laserbat. Yes, the Laserbat is the weakest in terms of DPS, but he's also been crowned the strongest pet for a long time. We'll get into that, don't worry. I'll explain that a bit more. 5th place is the Scythe Mage. 4th place is the Noisy Owl if only 1 projectile hits, otherwise 1st place if both projectile hits. In 3rd place is the Living Bomb, in 2nd place is the Flaming Ghost, and in 1st place is the Elf with the most damage. That's the ranking DPS wise. The Laserbat has the lowest DPS while the Elf has the highest DPS. But what's important here with the Laserbat is utility. When I talk about utility, I mean knockback, pierce, and going through walls. While Elf has the highest DPS, I found that she was strongly countered by obstacles, and a lot of the times in my runs with the Elf, she wasn't hitting the enemies due to the walls. Laserbat also has the fastest projectile speed out of the pets, meaning more likely to hit enemies than ones who are blocked off by walls. Since a year ago, ARCHERO has implemented a lot more chapters where walls have become an even bigger issue than before. So now we have to carefully consider more factors now. In terms of utility, this is how I ranked them. In the same spot, 6/5th place, is the Elf and Living Bomb. With the Elf, very fast attack speed which helps with its knockback, however I found her knockback to be weaker than others. The biggest problem I found with the Elf is that her projectiles. While they are very fast, it's very thin and very small. As you can see in this clip, the projectile isn't enough to hit the enemy in radius. She is also heavily countered by walls. In my playthrough with her, I found a lot of her attacks were not hitting because of obstacles. The Living Bomb, a pretty strong knockback, and it also goes over walls. It does not pierce through enemies and projectile speed is pretty fast. Living Bomb may be more useful in wave-based chapters where a lot of enemies are grouped up, or in chapters of a lot of grouping, as Living Bomb deals better with crowded places, and it also relies more on stationary targets as the projectile style is a bit strange. A lot of the attacks can go over the enemies if they were to move forward or move towards you. In fourth place is the Scythe Mage. Pierces through enemies and bigger projectile with a decent knockback. I found that the bigger projectile and piercing effect to be more useful, and I missed less with the Scythe Mage or just hit more enemies than I did with the Elf and the Living Bomb. In third place is the Noisy Owl. Huge projectiles, strongest knockback and built-in front arrow. I found the Noisy Owl to be super useful with its knockback and high damage when both projectiles hit. Because the projectiles were so big, I found that the owl was missing much less than the previous pets. In second place is the Laser Bat. Piercing effect and its biggest strength going through walls. However, the Laser Bat is not in first place of utility due to no knockback or really little knockback. But the fast projectile speed of its piercing effect has proved the bat to be more useful in situations, even with its lowest DPS compared to the other pets. The bat is more likely to hit more enemies, which means the DPS is actually higher when playing the game. In first place for utility is the Flaming Ghost. Pierces through enemies, goes through walls, a light knockback, and decent projectile speed with a wide radius. Why I gave Flaming Ghost first place for utility is because he can pretty much do everything the Laser Bat can do and a bit more. The reason why the Laser Bat got second place for me in utility is because while the projectile speed is really fast, it's also really thin, and I found that it could miss sometimes. The Flaming Ghost has a decent projectile speed and it also expands. Even with the enemies moving, the projectile was able to expand enough to just hit the enemy. That's my personal ranking for each pet's utility. As you can see, there are many other things we should consider other than a DPS calculation. It's also good to know that calculations are just that, calculations. In-game, there are things that we cannot factor in the calculations at all. The last ranking I will do before my overall tier list is the boss fight ranking. Most bosses are bigger and slower, meaning pets will most likely have an easier time hitting them. There are some bosses where one pet may do better than the other, however this ranking is for a majority of bosses and not specific bosses. In the same place, in 6th and 5th place for boss fights is the Laser Bat. I used Laser Bat in Chapter 7 when it was a lot harder than it is now. It took me 2 months to finish. The reason why I used the Laser Bat was because there were some obstacles in Chapter 7 that I struggled against, and my dodging was not that great back then. But generally in boss fights, there aren't many obstacles where the Laser Bat shines, so for boss-based chapters, I would use another pet and not the Laser Bat. Then we have the Living Bomb, better against stationary bosses, however that is a minority of bosses. In 4th place is the Scythe Mage. In 3rd place is the Flaming Ghost. In 2nd place is the Elf. She does have one of the highest DPS in the game. And in 1st place is the Noisy Owl. Noisy Owl does the most damage out of all the pets if both projectiles hit. Because bosses are generally bigger, Noisy Owl would do more damage than most of the other pets in boss fights unless you're going against a really small boss or a thin boss. Okay, so now for my overall tier list. Remember, this is just based on my research, my opinion, and personal experience. In below average, I have the Living Bomb. Pros: can hit and push back multiple enemies. Great for crowded areas like wave-based chapters. Fast attack speed, projectile goes over walls. Cons: projectiles can often go over enemies. Better against stationary targets, which is not a lot of enemies. Struggles against fast enemies, especially those that are melee like bees, skeletons, etc. Can miss quite often due to the nature of the projectile. In average, we have the Scythe Mage. Pros: pierces through enemies. Cons: slow projectile. There is not much to say about the Scythe Mage, but the reason I put Scythe Mage above Living Bomb is because the Scythe Mage seems to miss a lot less than the Living Bomb. Living Bomb relies more on still targets, which is why he is placed under. In above average is the Elf. Pros: fast attack speed, highest pure damage, works great against bosses. Cons: small projectile, this can sometimes miss enemies, only damages one enemy at a time. She is also heavily countered by walls, and there are a lot of walls in the game. I forgot to mention that is also a con for the Scythe Mage. In the same tier, we have the Noisy Owl. In my opinion, the best pet against bosses, as in best case scenarios, this pet will deal the most damage to bosses. Built-in front arrow, high damage, large projectiles, this also means it can miss less, damage can double if both projectiles hit the enemy, and a strong knockback. Cons: slow attack speed. Because of its large projectiles, one and rarely both can be absorbed by walls. Large projectiles increase clutter on the screen. Now for the best pet. Laser Bat. Still places on the top, decent attack speed and fast projectile speed, hits multiple enemies with its piercing effect, goes through walls. Cons: lowest pure DPS out of all the pets. However, this is negated with being able to reach enemies behind walls, as other pets without this perk will most likely just hit a wall. Projectile is thin. I found that it can be weak against moving targets, as the projectile was a bit too thin to hit the target. No or extremely low knockback. And the last pet in the same tier is the Flaming Ghost. Pros: pierces through enemies, projectile that expands, goes through walls, and higher base damage. Cons: wide projectile increases clutter on the screen. Because it's a similar projectile to the other ghost monsters, this can be confusing. That's my updated tier list for spirits. The reason I put Flaming Ghost and Laser Bat in the same tier is because they're not super different from each other. The only major difference is their projectile speed and attack speed, but with how the Flaming Ghost projectile works, I found it really effective in my runs. They both have their pros and cons, but after running the Flaming Ghost for a while now, and I was a Laser Bat main, so I ran with him for a very long time, I actually really like how effective he is compared to the other pet other than the Laser Bat. So in my opinion, overall, the Flaming Ghost and the Laser Bat are the strongest pets right now. However, I find the Noisy Owl to be very close behind them. That is all for today's video. I thank you very much for watching. Remember to always adjust to your playstyle and what you enjoy the most. Let me know in the comments down below which pet you like the best. Subscribe and click the bell for more videos. I hope to see you again for the next one. Bye! And also a like, please. Thank you.